In a land where the earth kissed the sky, there lived a man named Godias and his two sons, Thais and Sathias. They weren't your average family. They carried the essence of something ancient and powerful, something the world had yet to fully understand. Godias was a man of great wisdom, a guiding light in a world often clouded by darkness. His eldest son, Thais, was the embodiment of all that was good. From a young age, Thais showed extraordinary potential. Kind, patient, and intelligent, always striving to do what was right. His actions seemed to radiate a pure light, and Godias loved him dearly. Sathias, the younger son, was different. From the start, life wasn't as easy for him. Where Thais was calm and composed, Sathias was fiery and unpredictable, his emotions swirling like a storm. Godias tried to love both his sons equally, but as the years passed, it was clear that his heart leaned more toward Thais. As the brothers grew, so did the gap between them. Thais excelled in school, his grades perfect, his teachers full of praise. He became the golden child, adored by all, especially by his father. Godias often patted Thais on the back, his voice full of pride. Meanwhile, Sathias struggled. His grades were poor, and trouble seemed to find him, even when he wasn't looking for it. The weight of his father's disappointment grew heavier with each passing year. Thais, basking in his father's approval, began to look down on Sathias. He would criticize him for his failures, not with anger, but with a condescending tone that stung more than any harsh word. "Why can't you be more like me?" Thais would say, his words cutting deeper than he realized. Sathias tried to follow in his brother's footsteps, but the harder he tried, the more he stumbled. The taunts from his brother, the cold gaze of his father, and the constant feeling of falling short gnawed at his soul. He began to skip school, finding solace in the shadows where no one could see his pain. One day, overwhelmed by despair, Sathias took a knife to his skin. The sharp pain was a temporary release, a way to quiet the storm inside, if only for a little while. But the relief was fleeting, and the darkness continued to grow. One night, unable to bear the burden any longer, Sathias walked to the edge of a bridge. Below, the river roared, its waters churning like the turmoil within him. He stood there for what felt like hours, teetering on the brink, ready to end it all. But something stopped him. A voice, soft yet firm, whispered to him, urging him to turn back. "This isn't your end," it said gently. Sathias stepped back from the edge, tears streaming down his face. He wasn't sure why he listened, but deep down, he knew there was more for him. Though what it was, he couldn't yet see. That night, something changed in Sathias. If his father and brother saw him as trouble, then that's what he would become. "If they think I'm so bad, I'll show them just how bad I can be," he whispered to himself, his resolve hardening. Unbeknownst to him, the turmoil within had awakened something ancient and powerful. The dormant energies in his blood began to stir, responding to his anger and pain. One night, as he stood alone in a field, a strange sensation washed over him. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with power. The ground beneath him cracked open, and from the depths of the earth, fire and ash erupted, swirling around him like a tempest. Sathias stood at the center of the chaos, his eyes glowing with a fiery light. He could feel the power coursing through him, a force that had been asleep for too long. With a cry of rage, he summoned the flames higher, the earth trembling under his command. In that moment, Sathias understood what he was, a bringer of destruction, a force of darkness. He turned his gaze toward his father's home, hatred smoldering within him. "I'll show them," he growled, and with a wave of his hand, the earth split open, a path of fire and ash leading straight to his father's door. Godias and Thais were unprepared for what followed. The ground shook, the sky darkened, and from the depths of the earth, Sathias emerged, surrounded by a storm of fire and fury. Godias looked at his son, not with fear, but with sorrow. He knew this was the result of years of neglect, of a love unevenly divided. Sathias raised his hands, the flames around him intensifying, ready to strike down his father and brother. But before he could unleash his wrath, Theus stepped forward, a calmness in his eyes. He too had felt a power awakening within him, a force of light and goodness that had been with him all along but had never been needed, until now. With a wordless command, Theus raised his hands, and from the sky, a blinding light descended. It enveloped him and Godias, forming a shield of pure energy. Sathias's flames crashed against it, but they couldn't penetrate the barrier. Theus's power was the opposite of his brother's, a force of light that couldn't be overcome by darkness. The two brothers stood opposite each other, their powers clashing in a battle that shook the very foundations of the world. But as they fought, it became clear. This wasn't a battle that could be won by either side. Theus, for all his power, couldn't bring himself to destroy his brother, and Sathias, despite his anger, found his strength waning in the face of Theus's unwavering light. Finally, exhausted and realizing the futility of their struggle, the brothers stopped. They stood in silence, the remnants of their powers crackling in the air between them. Godias, who had watched the battle with a heavy heart, stepped forward. "My sons," he said, his voice filled with both sorrow and pride. "You were never meant to be enemies. You are two halves of the same whole, light and dark, creation and destruction. Together, you are the balance of this world." But Sathias, his heart still filled with bitterness, shook his head. "I'm not like Theus," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I'm not good. I'm not worthy." Godias placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You're not meant to be like Theos, just as he isn't meant to be like you. Your power isn't evil, Sathias, but it must be guided. Without you, there can be no balance. The world needs both of you, for you are the keepers of its fate." Sathias looked into his father's eyes and saw, for the first time, the truth of his words. But the wounds in his heart were deep, and though he understood, he knew he couldn't stay. The darkness within him was too strong, too volatile. "I must go," Sathias said quietly, turning away from his father and brother. "I can't stay here, not as I am." Godias nodded, understanding his son's decision. "Then go, but know you're not lost to us. You'll always be my son, and one day, perhaps, we'll be together again." With a final glance at his father and brother, Sathias stepped back, the ground opening beneath him. He descended into the earth, the flames that had once surrounded him now dimming as he vanished into the depths. Theus watched his brother go, a tear slipping down his cheek. He knew this wasn't the end, but a new beginning, one that would shape the world in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. Godias placed a hand on Theus's shoulder. "Come, my son," he said gently. "There's much to be done." Together, Godias and Theus ascended into the heavens, where they began to shape a new realm, a place of peace and light, a haven for those who sought goodness and truth. This place became known as Heaven, a sanctuary for souls in need of rest and redemption. Meanwhile, deep within the earth, Sathias created a realm of his own. It was a place of fire and ash, a kingdom where the lost and the damned would come to dwell. Though it was born of pain, it wasn't a place of pure evil, for even in darkness, there can be redemption. Sathias became its ruler, known to mortals as Satan, the keeper of hell. And so the balance was established. Heaven and hell, light and dark, good and evil, each necessary for the other to exist. Godias watched over them both, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what had come to pass, but also with hope for what the future might hold. For though the world had been divided, it wasn't broken. As long as there was light, there would be darkness, and in that balance, the world would endure.